evening. Welcome to another hands-on SAP dev session, a live session. We're still on the art and science of CAP, this brilliant series with the one and only, the inimitable CAP Papa Daniel Hutzel. Say hi, Daniel. Oh, Daniel's on mute, so I'll say hi for him. That's okay. So we've built this as sort of as a festive episode. I mean, we've got a nice background here. In fact, this is a background to the village of the village where I grew up when I was a kid. Just also, I'm staying at a friend's house today, which is why my lighting is not great. But she gave me a tiara to wear because it's festive, but it's so painful that I'm not going to wear it because it's like metal. So I'm just going to put it back there. But I've had it on anyway. So yeah, we're back for another episode. I'm really looking forward to this. This is going to be the last episode before we finish for the winter break, for the holidays, rather the festive holidays. We'll be back in the new year. But Daniel and I were just talking. I'm going to do a short 3-part series on hands-on SAP Dev to do with the CAP plugins. The thing that I did at the developer keynote part of TechEd, which is like plugins, how do you make plugins, what's going on? And I was using the REPL as well. I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. So I'll do a 3-part series, and then maybe if Daniel's up for it, of course I know he is, we'll do some more of these. So good morning to Vizes and to Rudolph in Ireland, Vizes in Thailand, of course. Good morning to you, Robin Van Het Hoff in the house, and Chanakia, a great friend of this channel, a great friend of Hannah's, and it's been a welcome everybody who's watching and who's watching the replays as well. Right, I'm going to share my screen. What we normally do, where's the share? The Zoom thing does my head in. I don't know what's going on here. Share. What we normally do, and Daniel, of course, you are always free to interrupt and add and correct. I just sort of give a summary of last week to land us nicely. But before I do, just yesterday afternoon, and this is quite an aside, I've not said this time, just a little bit too late for me to record this for this week's SAP Developer News, but of course we can record it for January's 1st January, the December release of CAP. So that's fantastic. So we've got, as normal, we've got some really, really cool changes in the Node.js version, in the Java version, in the tools, and look down here, CDS REPL enhancements. We'll talk about that shortly. So check out, by the way, while Daniel's talking, I'll share the link to these release notes in the YouTube chat, so you can go to it later. So yeah, check out the release December 2024, CDS 8.6.0 in the Node.js flavor and 3.6.0 plus in the Java flavor. So that's that. Before I move to the notes, there was something I was just mentioning to Daniel. I'm rewatching the SICP lectures, the Structured Interpretation of Computer Programs lectures, MIT course 6.001, and I just couldn't help but share the fact that Harold Abelson draws on in the very first lecture. Daniel and I, and we all have been talking about first-class functions and higher-order functions and higher-order queries, or first-class queries that can be saved and passed around and sent to functions and everything in CAP. What does he do in the very first lecture? He draws this thing which is basically all about higher-order functions. I think that's amazing. So I'll share a link to that as well. Here's the overview. I'm sure most of you watching know about this overview. I'll share a link to this. This is like the one, if you want one URL for this series with all the links to the live streams and the links to all the notes and everything, this is it. And thanks Vizes for commenting here as well. That's great. And now, so let's just have a quick summary of last week. One of the first things that Daniel saw, in fact, in the release notes down here, what Daniel was hacking on in the live stream last week is basically here. So thank you, Daniel. Daniel developer in developer mode was hacking on this, and it's in, and I've just added an update to these notes here. It's in the release notes. So Daniel showed us a -run, which is it's like a shortcut for saying, .run project once you're inside the REPL. But the use feature was, that's really cool, but the use feature was really, really intriguing. And now that's also in there as well. And Daniel showed a preview of that when I was going through the video thinking, where is this? Where's this code? And I was looking internally as well. It's like, it must just be on Daniel's laptop right now because I can't find where this is at all. So I had to sort of, interpolate what was going on. But the really cool thing about this, and this is all about making it easier to manually construct query objects, query CQN, query notation objects. Why is that important? Well, we'll see shortly. While Daniel was doing that, Daniel made this. Daniel, you had this throwaway line, which I pounced on. You know, cap CDL is infix filters, and so is CQN. I'm like, what? What? So I had to dive into CapIO, and I found some information about infix filters, and it made me really, really curious as to how we could have an infix filter in a definition, in the definition language, as in CDL, but also in the sort of the language, in the query language as well. So here is a bit of a summary of what Daniel was showing. And then I also, in the CapIO documentation, here's a perfect example of an infix filter. Okay, and here's an example of an infix filter in CDL, in the definition language as well. Okay, so here's the example there, and here's another example here when we're moving in the declarative sense in CDL from defining at the schema level, let's say, to publishing. We can also, even in this projection here, have an infix filter. So yeah, check out the documentation. It's actually recently been updated for this release as well. A little bit interesting there. But the key thing was that query objects for us as CAP hackers, CAP developers, are super important. And I think it's really, you know, I used to look at this stuff and think, oh my goodness me, that's really complicated. I don't really know what's going on. But the more we stare at this, the more we understand it, and the more important it is to understand this as well. So we're going from this query here, we're going to parse this query in CQL and get this query object. You can also, of course, construct exactly the same object using this, what I'm calling the literate style query building, right? With extra white space, okay, which is fantastic, even between the template literal calls here. Anyway, but I wanted to learn about infix filters a little bit more. I do like Northwind, and I've got my own cut down version of Northwind, which is called North Breeze. Obviously, see what I did there, North Breeze. And I've got product suppliers and categories. So I did this thing here. So in the appendix here, well, a bit further down, I show you how to bring in North Breeze and how to play around with it. But I think the most mind-blowing thing was, oh yeah, by the way, I also noticed, and this is something you need to be aware of, or maybe want to be aware of, you can construct a query like this with cds.parse.cql, and you can also construct a query in this sort of literate style, and you get this query object wrapper, which means it's immediately awaitable. If it's not awaitable, if it's not in this wrapper, then of course you can just pass it to CDS run, which is basically what happens in the background anyway when you do an await of the query itself. And again, this is all underlining the fact that queries are first class, because you can assign them to variables and then throw them at a function call. There, check it out. The thing that I thought, I want to see what it looks like in OData as well, what this query looks like. This query object, right here, that's the same in OData. But the thing that I didn't actually realize until I've done that is that this underlines how important query objects are. They're the sort of the neutral, canonical, sort of abstract center of the universe in terms of cap and queries. Because in the example here that Daniel was giving, when Daniel was explaining what, you know, how CQL is a superset of SQL, car, foo.bar, A, B, and C, these don't exist. But it doesn't matter that these don't exist, because at this level, the query object is abstract, and it's only when it, for example, gets reified into, for example, you know, an OData request, or reified into something that gets sent to a database service. And this underlines the whole idea of everything is a service, and things just get passed around and sent to different services to be, you know, to be processed, that it all makes sense. Very, very, very quickly now as well. Oh, it's only 8:09, that's fine. Daniel then moved on to showing us the CloudCap samples and digging in a little bit more to riff on what we covered a little bit in a previous episode, a prior episode to this one, which is mashups and composite services. Okay, so the Cloud Cat samples is this sort of mono repo or a repo that consists of a number of different services that are all independent but could be mashed together. And the bookstore example that Daniel showed us here has a dependency on the bookshop service and the review service, which don't know about each other, don't care about each other, but we can mash those up. And this is exactly what the bookstore does. And we've got this nice sort of front door file, index.cds, which just then refers to the mashup file in the serve directory. In there, this is the these are the crown jewels of understanding for this mashup, right? In fact, it's this line here. We bring in, oh, hello, let's bring in the books from a bookshop. Oh, hello, let's bring in reviews from the review service. Oh, I don't know you, I don't know you. Get to know each other and then join together. I did see this as sort of as like a dating service for domain entities. And this is, I think it's a really easy way of thinking about how powerful this is. Further on, right, when we started to run, or Daniel started to run the bookstore service, it was a reminder of what happens in design time. So we have this affordance that we talked about in the previous, in part 4 there, tight loops, design time affordance. I've got a broken link there. That's why. Okay, wait a minute. Anyway, I'll fix that link shortly. But that's basically the notes to the part 4 episode. Just as a reminder, the bookstore service realized that the review service didn't exist and the order service didn't. It couldn't find bindings in this special file, cdsservices.json. So it started to mock them. But when Daniel started in a couple of extra shells, the review service and the orders service on ports 4005, 4004 plus 1, and 4004 plus 2, 4006, then it connected to them and started using them. And that was just absolutely fantastic. So we also then, or Daniel also then moved on away from sort of this sort of CDS services affordance at design time, which is just fantastic, to another grow as you go affordance. I just need to stop using that word. I need to find another word. Facility, which is file-based messaging. So we want to do some messaging. We want to do some asynchronous emitting and receiving of events, but we don't want to start messing around with any sort of Kafka or whatever the event service is called today from on BTP. We just want it to work, and the file-based messaging is something that works out of the box. So Daniel put a review in the reviews service that emitted an event, and that event was received by the bookstore. Now we were looking around, and I couldn't remember either what the file was, and it's .cds message box. Okay, that's in also the users directory in the same way that the CDS services.json is this file that different services use to say, hey, is there something that's providing a binding for this service, that's providing this service, and where is the binding? This file here, and this is what's in the file. If we don't have the message immediately consumed, if we sort of stop the consuming service, then we can see what's in this file here, which is basically just a really neat version of what gets emitted. Okay, so I basically, in order to see this, I stopped the bookstore, looked in the file, that's what's in it. And of course, as soon as I started the bookstore up again, it got consumed, which is fantastic. So if there's one thing you should do after this one is dig into this file-based messaging and this grow as you go. And then I think it's fair to say, Daniel, that the rest of the episode was given over in a general sense to exploring event processing and how it's agnostic and how we have two different children of the general event sort of parent. One is a synchronous request response type thing, and the other is an asynchronous message that, of course, implicitly doesn't need or isn't looking for a response. And we saw how similar these two different things are, these two different subclasses of the event superclass here. I learnt more even more about the handlers, the before phase handler. Okay, we know about that already. And what Daniel showed us, that if we have an on handler, I'll say this to Daniel's face, it still disturbs me with a handler identifier with a white space in it. I mean, come on, white space everywhere, but not there, please. It does my head in. I'm just kidding. That just like that distracted me no end. But we had an on handler, and then we got the oh yeah, here we go. We got the send, and then we got the see request. But then we got this event message when we used a different method: send, emit, sending the same thing but using the different method. What gets instantiated in a send is a request object that, of course, is implying it's waiting for a response. An event message isn't. And that it was a really nice way of landing into this whole idea of the difference between requests and event messages, which are documented in CAPI. I've got links a bit further down. And the really, really cool, important and interesting thing is that the interceptor stack, which is basically this stack of handlers, the on handlers, each gets a chance. The first one gets a chance to handle it and may or may not pass the handling on to the next one in the list, because remember, before handlers and after handlers are all carried out in parallel, but the on handlers, which are basically the whole thing, they all get called in sequence. But the sequence only happens in this the whole interceptor pattern is the sequence only happens if the handler that's just run says, all right, I'm going to get the next one to continue. So if it calls next, okay, and if it doesn't call next, the handling of that request is deemed to be complete, and any subsequent handlers are not called. And Daniel showed in a really, really nice way how that is the case by defining extra handlers, which I'm reproducing here. But adding a second on handler, we saw it didn't get called in the context of a send, in the context of a request message, but of a request object, in the context of an event message object, it did get called, because basically there's no concept of a return message. So philosophically, every on handler really should get a chance to fire. So there isn't this, it needs to have the next called in order for those subsequent handlers to be fired. Anyway, that's a really bad summary of this, but there you go. You can read this and find out, because the moment of truth was when we added the event, but the event when we had the handler received the next object or the next function and called it, which then allowed the gotcha function to be called as well in the handling phases. Finally, or almost finally, Daniel dived into the difference between events and requests a little bit more. And if you look at the documentation, it's beautiful, because it basically says the CDS event class is a base class for CDS requests. So it's almost like you have this sort of core, pure idea of an event, and then a request is just extending that pure idea an event and adding things like methods that allow you to send back a response. Okay. Daniel also connected his VS Code to Node.js. That's a fantastic option. It's a standard thing in VS Code and Node.js. So I'll put the link to the documentation there. And then finally, and this was just the tip of the iceberg a little bit, I think, we sort of circled back a bit to this concept of does not understand. And Daniel started talking about and showing us and explaining the ideas of a remote service. And what we're really creating when we create a service is potentially a proxy to a remote service. And yeah, I'll put here as well, an essential example of this is CQL, which allows CAP to dispatch events and their payloads to various services, including database services and protocol handlers, where then and only then is this sort of abstract pure object, this query object, resolved, crystallized into something, decrystallized into something that's real, either for a protocol OData or for a database service like MySQL or something. Anyway, Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say here. It's 8:20 already, so I apologise for rambling a little bit. I did lose my way when I was trying to summarise my summary, but Danny, is that a fair summary?
It is. And yeah, as I wrote also in the comments, really great. So it's really fun for me to read this and see that you captured all the things and explained it maybe even better. So very uh, much a must read, I would say, for everybody who
Well, thank
wants
you.
to learn.
Okay, so while you're sharing screen and starting your session, I'm going to start sharing those URLs to people in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, maybe while you summarize the last session, I took some notes where to start with. And maybe let's start with yeah, so I'm in Rebel already. Start with that thing. So we start the Rebel and start the bookshop, and I just inspect the catalog service dot handlers because when last time we were looking at the handlers, also printed in your summary, I thought it's a bit hard to read, so I tried to make it nicer to read. Like these are our initial handlers. You don't know them. It's framework stuff will go away as well. These are our before handlers, one on patch, one on update, and it's an async function with that name, etc. And these are our own handlers for the different requests. And
Just a quick reminder, Daniel, don't forget to share your screen as well.
oh, sorry. So then I show exactly that again, right? Share. You see it, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So just very quickly again, I start Rebel with the bookshop and I inspect the catalog service handlers and I see the handlers now, the same handlers in a better way to display and to interpret what's here, like the two before handlers and the on handlers. And that is also something, a pattern that you will recognize quite quickly. All the on handlers, no, all the actions have on handlers because they are custom actions, while the CRUD events are the standard events that we serve, while all actions need extra handlers on your side. Okay, so that's just this little improvement here, also in the latest release, in this December release. And the other thing is maybe having another look at the queries, as you just explained. So this is, by the way, this is a new, so CDSQL existed always, but it's now a function. And think of it as a cast function. You can feed it with everything, and it spits out an instance of query, which is executable, so awaitable. So with that one here, we create this query. Oops, create the query. And because it's an instance of a query which you can identify by this prefix in the display CDSQL, we can await it. And it reads the authors with their nested books. Yeah, there's a twin sister function which is called CDS parse CQL, and that also parses that thing, and it also gives us a CQN object, but in that case, not an instance of uh, an executable query. You can try it, await it, but it just returns itself because that's what await does if the target is not attainable. And this is also what I wanted to get at. So all the magic about these awaitable queries is pretty simple. So this is our query. Here we have it. We can await it. So it's a
Hmm.
CQN object and it doesn't do anything. But if I say, hey, you should be attainable, and attainable looks like that, it happens to
Oh,
have a
Venable,
method,
of course.
a method called then with two functions, callbacks, one for resolving the promise and one for the exceptions. And this is actually what our implementation looks like. I just say, oh, it has to be a function, sorry, because I want to use this.
Ah, yes.
I just say now return. Guess what? CDS run this.
This.
And
Oh
that's
my goodness, that is amazing.
actually not return, of course, but resolve.
Yeah, because it's a promise.
Oh no, even better. I like this style more. I do a return because I should return the promise. It's a chain, promises are chain. And then I say then, and I just hand over the parameters given to me to the chain.
Oh my God.
Now let's await this query, which was not available before, and now it's unavailable. That's it. How to
My
make
mind is
your
already
venables promises
calculating
and
the amount of coffee I'm going to need when I'm summarizing this episode.
right. And to just prove that it's true, this is the implementation of this query base class, and this three-liner is what I just showed. Basically, it's in here. The rest is just making sure that you get debug trace stacks in the best possible way along this async stuff.
Sorry, Daniel. I think most people are okay with the font, but there's a couple that are struggling a little bit. So maybe on
Yeah,
the VS Code and the repo, just maybe bump up by one or something, please.
yeah, adjust it. So it's good
Thank you.
now. Okay. Yeah, and as the command says, turns all queries into Thanables, which execute with primary DB by default, or by a service they have been bound to, but that's another story. Now, another thing to reflect is, yeah, you remember in the beginning last time I wanted to show remote services and ran
Yes.
into all these bugs, and thanks DJ for not having that in the summary. But I'd like to revisit it just to prove that something at least should work. Let's do the same thing that I wanted to do that time. So we start the bookshop service here. And this, for the time being, not in REPL. So it's up and running at Classic 404. And now in REPL, I want to do something with that remote bookshop service. So I want to connect to it. So let's say I want to connect to the catalog service. I call it catalog service, cats. And it's an await CDS connect as we are used to it
Hmm.
to the catalog service. And for sure tells us I don't know catalog service.
Yeah.
But if you read the documentation, I think at least it's in the documentation, you can also say, hey, I really want to connect to this thing, and I expect this to be, data service. And in case you don't know,
Credentials URL. This is basically what you're going to type is what we would see in package JSON, for example.
exactly, right. So I just help the machinery who is not able to find it themselves and tell it it's here, and we will get to another error. I think. Yeah, this one. Uncalled exception.
Ah,
DJ,
I
you
think I
also
came across
detected
this
this,
once.
right?
Yeah.
And I was also checking, so what the hell is happening here? So I switched on debug, and it's the same again. And still didn't get much more. So unfortunately, so didn't help. So but I would still wanted to share. Then I just search for uncalled exception in our code base everywhere. Ah, that should not show up. And put a breakpoint on that somewhere
Hmm.
where I expected it to be the culprit, like in here or somewhere. And by that, I finally managed to find out
Oh, wow.
it's the cloud SDK using the Winston logger, and the Winston logger very aggressively does uncaught exception games.
What?
So what I finally did is I just patched the Winston logger. I think it was down here. Here it is. Remove these lines and
Oh my goodness me.
hit it again. Here we are. So
So that
connect
was, so
again.
it
So
was,
this. Yes. So, by the way, just a remark, I had a hard time at the beginning being the chief architect and CPO of CAP, convincing my people, the young developers, to accept, no, we don't use as much open source software as possible, but we use as less dependencies as
yeah,
possible, because a
yeah.
dependency for an enterprise software product means we have to warrant that it's correct, everything that we give you, right? Because we are the contract partners. You don't sue the others, the open source guys, but you sue us.
It's a double-edged
Therefore, we
sword,
have to protect
definitely.
ourselves. Everybody should have this thinking, I would say, because we all know about these log4j issues, etc.
Yeah,
Happens every year. And it's unfortunate, but you can't just rely on all the developers out there doing everything right. And so we protect us. CAP by intent has only three major dependencies. It's Express, it's Node.js, and it's SQLite.
yeah.
And then our own ones, HANA, for example.
Well said.
Okay, going further, so that's a CAT service. So let's see whether that works. Get books.
You do realize that I'm going to ask you about the fact that it's called a remote service, capital R, capital S as well.
Right. So get books. Yeah, it's a query, of course. Let's await it. Yeah, here we are.
What?
So you saw the server reacting. This was my request sent here. And yeah, of course, you can just go on like cats read ID and title and Java and so books. Yeah, works.
Can I just stop you there and basically just think about what's happening here, which is the read method is almost like a convenience function just for constructing query objects, right?
Mhm.
So basically, what's happening is you're sending a query object to this remote service.
Mhm. Exactly. And yeah, maybe a good point, DJ, basically. So what we saw here is this connect to. Um, yeah, maybe, of course. Yeah, I come back to that. Of course, you should never put credentials in here, right? So what would you do instead? You would do something like a service binding. Service binding is a big name, but at the end of the day, it's just a way to provide your credentials without putting it into your code. So
Yeah,
put it somewhere else. Put it in the environment, in the binding environment of your cloud platform. VCAP services is a way to do that in Cloud Foundry.
yeah,
Others have other things. So on Kubernetes, we have the secret files or the property files. And in CAP, you have also the process env. And for example, we can do it. Yeah, let's do it like that.
in the
CDS.
in the REPL, everything's allowed though.
In the REPL, we can do it exactly. Yeah, yeah, let's do in the REPL. So just the CDS REPL without anything else. And then I say process. No, no, let's not do in a REPL, but really in process env. So it's CDS requires requires catalog service kind of data. I hope I can combine these. I think I can. And never tried it too much at least. And CDS requires catalog service credentials URL to be that one. So just setting two environment variables before starting REPL.
You want to add the OData as a value to the first one. Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
equals
that's right.
OData.
I'm made this broke. And now let's try to connect again without the credentials. Yep, fine.
No, that is ridiculous.
So that's all the mystic of service bindings. By the way, the ABAP colleagues also used the term service binding, but they reused it sort of for a different concept and a different thing. So if you know service bindings from ABAP, don't confuse it with service
Yeah.
bindings in Cloud Worlds or in CAP. Yeah. And with that, this was what I wanted to do before I get to that. That line of code is the very same line of code you would do to connect if we were in this process to connect to the catalog service locally. And these other lines of code, like this one, would be the same, very same lines of code that you would write to read from the local catalog service or from the local database service. Always, everything is a service, as we learned already. And this is what we call this agnostic design of CAP. You, as a developer, should not have to care about any protocols, about any low-level stuff. You just work as if you are A, alone in the world, no multi-tenancy, and isolated. B, always local. There is no remote.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this gives you two things, less work, and even more, the ability to test your stuff in isolation without all the bells and whistles. It's much easier to test why this handler over here in response to a remote request from there failed when you can debug in the same process instead of reasoning what this 500 Axios error is about.
Yes. Yes.
So, and this is actually what we started now. Our tests used to be tests like we send a bunch of OData requests. We don't do that anymore. We just connect to a CAP service and send it requests, local requests, and then we switch on the remote channel, which basically means, and now I need maybe to paint something very quickly.
Uh-huh.
So if CAP service game by default is something like I have a service A which talks to a service, oops, a service B, then this is local. And when we separate this into two remote things, what happens is basically just pull it over here, and that one still connects to something like B, but it's a proxy of B. But that
Like we
connection,
saw at the final part of last week. Yeah.
yeah, right, exactly. And this one is then sending a request over to that one. So it translates the CQN that comes in here, query, to something else, protocol specific. And you should not care which protocol it is, because instead of OData, you could also decide to use GraphQL or HCQL.
In fact, I think that answers a question that Vishal has in the chat. Does it work with REST service as well, since it looks to be query for OData? I mean, CAP
Exactly.
SQL connecting to REST service. And of course, I think the
Right.
answer is a big fat yes.
Right, exactly. Of course, if you send queries and expect something like this query, which I sent here, to be understood by the other side, you expect the other side to understand it. And you
Yeah.
expect to have a protocol which is able to transport that information. Any REST doesn't. REST, as I shared in this uh, piece of table comparison here, Um, the more best practices comparison of query languages.
Yeah.
This is CQL. GraphQL understands not everything that OData understands. So filtering, sorting doesn't have a standard expression in GraphQL, and REST does understand no queries
Yeah.
unless you teach it, and we do so. Yeah, but on the other hand, REST is able to express everything if you invent a language on top of REST. OData is nothing else than REST plus querying. In
Exactly.
sometimes a bit of verbose style, admittedly. And therefore, by the way, we had invented our own thing. Let's show this. You might have seen this somewhere. Um, go to the cat service and say, um, I want you to be served as an
Oh, yeah.
HCQL
Oh,
protocol.
HTQL, yes.
Let's start this. But it is already started. Oh, no, I should not do that. Fiddling around with that. Yeah, we do it the next time. So HCQL basically means the following. Um, Instead of translating a CQN object to OData string and then have an adapter on the target side, an OData adapter, which does nothing else than translating the OData string back to the hopefully same CQN string to send it to B as if you had sent that request locally from A to B, which we did also locally. We could say, well, why do we need to translate to OData? We could translate to GraphQL, yes, and we could just serialize the original thing. Because CQN is a plain object notation of queries, and we can serialize that of JSON, of course. And then we have the HCQL adapter on the target side. And this is why we built this HCQL adapter. It's just the most or least overhead adapter because no translations to different languages. The least loss adapter because we have the full power of our language, and the most powerful because all these features are available, and the fastest of all.
Does the H in HCQL stand for hibernate?
Say again.
Does the H in HCQL stand for hibernate? Or is that
No, for HTTP.
oh, oh my oh god, my brain's just
It's
exploded.
it's basically CQL or CQN over HTTP. That's the idea.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
Wow.
so that was this thing. Yeah. Uh, Basically, I thought this time we would do the bad practices, but now we followed up on the things of last time. But I think these were worth it, and maybe we should then, yeah, look at these things here again in a revisit. We did it in a former session, but now I added some more documentation, which was always the intent of the documentation should follow this series of videos and our chats, DJ.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
I think it might also just before we leave this section or think about moving slightly away. I say this a lot, but I think I need to say it each time. REST isn't a protocol. REST is an architectural style,
Exactly.
which sort of explains what Daniel was saying about the fact that yes, you can sort of make it, you could get REST to work, but you need to invent a protocol, as in an OData is the most. In fact, I was having a conversation with a friend on what's it called, Blue Sky this morning. He was going to build his own RESTful protocol.
Right.
And I said, well, I tried to do that once, and then I realized how fantastic OData was because that's exactly what I was trying to aim for.
Exactly. Exactly. So the most criticism which I share with our data is it has a, yeah, how to say, it has this Java background, right? And in Java, XML was very prominent.
Yeah,
XML was like what JSON is to Node.js or to the JavaScript world.
it's a little bit academic.
Exactly. And very typed and very verbose, but really good
Yeah,
in
yeah.
conceptually. And this is not only because I know the guy who was Mr. Odata at SAP,
Ralph,
just left now because he's not old, but he deserved it.
are you talking about Ralph?
Exactly, Ralph
Yeah.
Handel. Really cool guy.
Yes, very,
Yeah.
very.
Um, yeah. Very quickly on the concepts. We had domain models already last time, and DJ, you just touched again this thing about what is an association and what is infix filters and what are nested projections. These are the three things that we add to SQL. I will share maybe a Christmas present for you. I shared it also with DJ for you to have some things to work on, and then we check back who solved the riddle
Brilliant.
at the end of this session. Yeah, domain models, very important. Capture domain, what, not how, and keep it simple, stupid, and understandable for domain experts. That's the key thing on domain modeling. Services, the key thing is services are interfaces and they provide the facades from the inside out and protect your inner stuff from the outside. And the service providers you get mostly by us because we feed CUP with definitions, with domain models and service models, which allows us to serve most requests automatically without you doing glue coding. Whenever you see a project with a lot of glue code, a CUP project, something is wrong. Yeah, and then comes it gets more important. What you greatly revisited and analyzed is really this nature of events, and this is really key. And when it comes to, I also talked to DJ before, art and science, it's not only because I love this Smalltalk book with that very same name, The Art and Science of Smalltalk, but also I love the approach. They try to prove that the things, how Smalltalk does it, is right based on some axiomatic science concepts, which were A, in the world long before, and B, very proven. And just agreed that these things are true. It's like believing that Newton was not completely wrong or something, right? Um, yeah, and this events thing is just stolen from Smalltalks and other message passing system. So the science is message passing instead of function calls or method invocation. These are two different schools of thinking, basically. And
Yes.
the method passing, message passing makes it that powerful, I believe. Does not understand as a keyword, or in our case, this on whatever. Makes proxies very easy to build, like the service proxies we just saw, and makes the agnostic design very easy to build and very consistently to build, which ends up in hexagonal architecture, which I want to come to. And also, yeah, as shown here, so events is synchronous or asynchronous or request or events or local or remote. We just don't care. It's always an event. And the way we send event and meet events and handle events is always the same.
Yeah.
Data and the important thing, maybe data is the most boring part, but it's even the most important part to not screw. Whenever you start building data access objects, old school wise, or using object relational mappers, old school wise, you end up in a violation of exactly the principles written here. Data has to be as passive as possible
Yes.
and as flexible as possible. Otherwise, you don't get the benefits from querying and you kill extensibility.
What's the
By the way, a
mantra? Passive
transcript,
data, active services.
yeah, a transcript of another session I gave the day before yesterday turned my saying of if you follow all the bad practices, listen here, then you will kill the benefits of CAP. This is what I said, and it translated it to then you will kill the cat. It's also nice. Yeah, it's data and then it's querying. And again, CAP is an offspring of CDS, is an offspring of a project codenamed Kronos, which was this firefighting project of a big SAP product, which I had the joy to lead together and working together with the key architects and key developers of that project, which really had hard performance problems. And we also had the joy to have to report to Hutzel whether we make progress, and you could imagine that this is giving you some pressure.
Yes.
And the key findings were don't build frameworks on frameworks on frameworks on frameworks. In that case, ABAP is an application programming language. It's not meant to build frameworks with. Object relational mappers is the second thing. They tried to mimic what Hibernate did for JPA, for Java and JPA later, and other object relational mappers in ABAP on top of OpenSQL. Turned out to be not the brightest idea because, yeah, OpenSQL is exactly what CAP gives you with this embedded query language. And we try to restore this notion of, hey, capture the queries because the queries is much more powerful than a dump object relational mapper read approach.
Yep.
And they allow us to push down the queries to the database. So push down queries to database. And the last one was, we come to that in the bad practices, determination and validations. You might have heard this term, especially if you have an upper background as well. And we very much fell in love with this concept, but this ended up in a very fragmented set of event handlers on element level, on field level. While in CAP, we explicitly, for that reason, always reject to introduce something like that. We have been approached several times to introduce element level determination handlers, but they end up in a fragmented code, which is a performance killer. We can go into more details maybe next time. Yeah, agnostic by design, very important. So we are agnostic to local versus remote, to protocols, to databases, to platform services. So you don't know whether you talk to Kafka or to Event Broker if you don't follow bad practices at least. And this is basically what Alistair Cockburn, also in the C2 Wiki, promoted 20 years ago as hexagonal architecture, which is quite famous and fancy today, and absolutely correctly. And in this section, the first time thought, okay, I have to share now that CAP is an implementation of hexagonal architecture. Actually, the same ideas were the main ideas for this agnostic model in CAP. And yeah, what I detected is there's a lot of work outside on hexagonal architecture, but people don't even read Alistair's very first sentence, which is about the reason why hexagonal architecture is important. And what he wanted and explicitly expressed is when I build a software that later on needs to connect to whatever, a radar system, a keyboard, a printer, and I want to test the software. I don't want to be forced to connect all these real-world devices all the time.
Yeah.
In our world, this is all the cloud services. I want to be able to develop and test locally in inner loops fast and cheap. Very much what CAP is trying to teach.
Local first.
Yeah. And exactly these adapters here, in his original work, he called it transformers. So transformed from that kind of protocol to that kind of protocol, like from OData to CQM, is exactly our adapters, inbound and outbound. So you find that in more detail here. Also some interesting discussions like what is the difference between a codomain and an application model, etc. And yeah, Intrinsic extensibility is another thing which I always thought that is clear to people who see the first traces of CAP, similar to infix filters. I thought this is clear, but it wasn't. Yeah, and we just had it recently when we saw somebody porting ABAP wrap solution to CAP, and he was looking for the equivalence of what he knew from wrap and didn't know that 50% is not necessary to be
Yeah,
done in Cabot because we do it automatically. And the other 50%, more than 50 of that, is we just have be at least say a better way to do it because we don't need a framework for that, but yeah, do it natively. And one thing that was also very unclear is, you know, we had this aspect-oriented model telling us that whatever you get from somewhere, you get the managed aspect that we designed. So you don't own that stuff. Please don't touch it, right? But you can, of course, extend it with whatever you like in your context.
in your own context,
Yeah.
exactly.
And everything that inherits that and uses that, even our entities that you might also reuse, or the entities of somebody else, will see your extension and get your extension. So we can extend models, models that you create, models that you reuse from a library. You can add custom logic. You can add an event handler to whatever service you get access to. You connect to a service that we provide and you don't own, but you can add event handlers to it absolutely freely. And we use this also for SaaS customer extensions. And the last thing is, I thought also that was very clear, but it wasn't obviously. You can extend the framework in the same way as you can, because everything is a service, also our database services, for example, or our messaging services, then you can extend it, adding event handlers to these services. And just recently, maybe we show this next in one of the next session for an internal big project, about 1,000 developers onboarding now, some with Java, some with Smalltalk ABAP background, sorry.
You wish.
They, yeah, we created something like a new annotation, assert constraint. You can give it expressions, constraint expressions, which can be very complex. It can contain aggregation functions like sum, average, min, max, whatever. It can contain arbitrarily length association paths with infix filters, of course,
Of
and
course.
other things. And we can then collect all these expressions, but instead of executing them one by one in the framework as the fragmented event level handlers performance problems did. We just collect them, compile a SQL statement out of that, send it to SQL. So we push the validation checks, the complex one in particular, to the data instead of reading the data in order to run the validations. And the cool thing is, this was a 10-line of code
Wow. Yeah.
by Adrian Görler, our Java database guy and product owner. And he explained and showed it to the team, the 1,000 developer team, and said, and the good thing is, what I used here is no magic knowledge about our implementation. It's just standard CAP usage coding. You could do that your own. So we will share
Beautiful.
this next time. And it's basically using this extensible framework thing.
Fantastic, fantastic. I'm just, by the way, this is almost perfect timing. We've got 2 minutes left, but I mean, I think this is a great thing to think about. I mean, actually, just by the way, not only is the framework extensibilized, and we did cover this a little bit in a previous part as well, but it'd be great to dive in a little bit more to maybe think about how we might extend it. But of course, we have the plugin concept as well, which is sort of the higher level extensibility from a design time and also a runtime. Um, but yeah, that is that. Maybe that's where we should leave it, Daniel, because the homework for everyone is to go and read or
Yeah.
reread this getting started, especially the best practices, which Daniel has sort of revised since I last saw it, because you got rid of the phrase microservices mania, which I'm slightly disappointed about. Yeah, so thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing all this amazing stuff with us. We're going to take a break now until the new year. Daniel, any last words from you before we say goodbye?
Um, no.
Nice as always. Amazing.
So
Daniel,
only thank you very much for your interest, and thank you very much, DJ, for kicking that off basically and giving this frame to everything.
thank you so much. And thank you most of all to everyone on the chat, everyone who watches live, especially you that watch live, but also everyone watching the replays. Send us your comments, send us your thoughts. Daniel and I and the rest of the CAP team love to hear from you all. But with that, I wish you all a very happy holidays, and Daniel too, and we'll see you in the new year. Bye for now.
Bye.
Okay, we're off. Thank you. Thank